Good afternoon, everyone, and a very happy Erev Shabbat. We are together again for the Henry and Lisa Manoucheri Parsha Shiur with Rabbi Akiva Zweig, Rosh Yeshiva at the Talmudic University of Florida. The rabbi is going to be discussing Parshas MiKeitz and Hanukkah. The topics will be our light versus their terror, as well as to dehumanize or rehumanize, the truth about Torah wisdom and forgiveness. The month of Kislev is sponsored by Dr. Yoram Padeh in honor of his parents, Dr. Asher Padeh and Dr. Ilonka Schwartz. Zichronam Livracha, may their memory be a blessing. He wishes that our entire nation has a tremendous Hakoras Hatov to Hashem for all he has done for us over the millennia, and especially now, and God willing, much more in the near future. A special thank you from him to Rabbi Akiva Zweig for helping to guide us through Torah wisdom on the path of redemption to our utopian destination, God willing. This week's class is also dedicated for a Refu'ah Shalem, a complete healing, for Perel Sasha bas Meril Rivka, Yehoshua ben Faiga Chaya, and Shlomo ben Baila. Without further ado, Rabbi Akiva Zweig on MiKeitz and Hanukkah.
Good afternoon, good Erev Shabbos. Pleasure to be with everybody. It is Erev Rosh Chodesh Teves as we continue to celebrate what is hopefully a light and joy-filled Hanukkah for everyone. A lot of things have been happening in current events over this last week, and today I would like to do a little bit of an unusual approach in terms of how we're going to deal with current events. Not everybody is necessarily read in. So I did ask Ohad Fidida, who is not only a Talmud of the Yeshiva, but also works very closely with Dr. Finkelstein, and now in a doctorate program in New Jersey at Rutgers University, to give us some background. But before we get to it, let me give background to the background. First of all, we are all reeling from the horrors of what happened in Australia on Bondi Beach, and the fact that Jews now more than ever are being very clearly targeted and attacked physically in horrible, horrible ways. And what is the appropriate response to that? In addition, as we've been still processing October 7th and post-October 7th realities, we have always been very focused in this class on a collective Jewish response. What is the Torah response? And not too long ago, we talked about Charlie Kirk's murder and the fact that, that was obviously a very horrible portent of the types of violence that there is still yet to come. And one thing we have not really addressed is the very public statement of forgiveness by his wife, forgiving the murderer. Today we're going to talk about what is the Torah point of view on forgiveness, and what is the Torah wisdom about that, and that's going to correlate to how Yosef deals with his brothers over these next parashiyos, including this one that we're going to talk about in detail. So we also are privileged to be joined today with one of our regular attendees, Noah Tal, who is an attorney that works for Google. And I'm currently in the middle of doing a major project on an anti-Semitism work with her. And she has a very particular commentary that she shared with me and Ohad before the class that relates to this week's current events. So now I'm going to ask Ohad to share about the current events. Then we're going to go right into the Parsha. And at the end of the class, we're going to both read or have read, perhaps Noah will read it herself, her response to the current events that Ohad is discussing now. I would like to make a mention that because we also have the great privilege of Dr. Patterson joining us this week, and I'm sure he's at least somewhat up to speed on some of these things, we definitely look forward to his comments to all of that after we conclude the class. So Ohad, if you wouldn't mind, please go ahead.
Thank you, Rebbe. And I see Dr. Finkelstein is here. He may have been a better option for this, but and this is by no means exhaustive, just very, very brief overview. So the context is that currently what we're seeing on the right is a civil war of sorts, a process of, I would say, birur, where we're sort of clarifying the direction of the movement, and this intensified especially after the death of Charlie Kirk. So who is Tucker Carlson? Everyone heard his name. He was a mainstream media figure. He was a Fox News host, and he was sort of a mouthpiece of the establishment for many years. He was very supportive of the Iraq War, basically was the average mainstream face of the movement. And recently, when he left that and opened up his own sort of thing, he very quickly spiraled into what he calls a nationalist America First populist, but he shifted into questioning everything to the point of absurdum. So he starts re-questioning and re-evaluating American ideals and the Jewish relationship, and he injects cynicism and extremism into the movement under this new I have awoken perspective of now everything is going to be questioned, the establishment, the mainstream. So under that guise of I'm just asking questions, like all of these folks are doing, he injects a resentment, a cynicism, and ironically, he undermines all of these America First values that he is claiming to support. He emboldens our enemies, and he actually actively pushes their propaganda, knowingly or unknowingly, because he is so awake. So Ben Shapiro and him started this feud as he started spiraling into this insanity. Ben and him started quibbling, and it really reached a tipping point now where there's this big festival, this big conference called AmFest, which is part of Turning Point USA's event. And Ben came out and gave this first principles speech where he went all the way back and but line by line, point by point, started criticizing Carlson and argued that if we are going to have a viable right-wing movement, we are going to have to set up boundaries and to actively push these extremists out. Carlson, in his speech, in response, on the same conference, rejected all of this and with a lot more of an emotionally pathos-based speech, rejecting this and sort of arguing that any attempt to some extent to create these boundaries and to push people like him aside is an active violation of free speech and everything Charlie stood against. So to some extent, that's where we are, and overall in the bigger right-wing space.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ohad. Very, very good background, and we look forward to the end of the class when we'll hear some response to that. So Parshas MiKeitz opens up with the famous dreams of Paro, two specific dreams, one where the 7 healthy cows eat the 7 weak cows, where the 7 good stalks of grain eat the 7 weather-beaten ones and unhealthy ones, and then the butler remembers to mention Yosef to Pharaoh, and he says there's this foolish young boy, Na'ar. The Rashi says in this context means that he's foolish, he's a slave, he's a Hebrew, and he actually works for the chief executioner. But when we were in jail, me, the butler, and my colleague, the baker, we shared our dreams, which we discussed last week, with him, and Joseph interpreted them correctly. So very interestingly, Paro immediately calls for Yosef, and they bring him out from the pit. Yosef shaves, and he changes his clothing, and he comes to Paro. So even before we get into detail here, in terms of this significance of Paro's dreams, I want to point out that they took him out of the pit, but he shaved, not they shaved him. He changed his clothing, not they changed his clothing. He came to Pharaoh, not they brought him to Pharaoh. I think that's very, very interesting. We're going to come back and discuss that as well. So it's not like Joseph himself was forced to shave or change his clothing or come to Paro, those are things that he did, as opposed to taking him out of the pit. They took him out of the pit. The Torah then continues how Pharaoh again tells over his dream, right? So the Torah initially is describing the dream from the point of view of Pharaoh experiencing it, as if we're in the mind of the Pharaoh and we hear his thoughts and we see him experiencing this dream. And then Pharaoh says the dream over to Joseph, and he proceeds to interpret it in detail. So one of the astonishing consequences of that is that Pharaoh immediately appoints Joseph as the viceroy of Egypt. He says, hey, is there anyone wiser and more understanding and smarter than Joseph, a man who the spirit of Hashem, God, is Elohim, is in him? And he immediately gives him his signet ring, and he drives him in his chariot. He marries him off, and immediately Joseph is in charge of everything that happens in Egypt. So this is a major, major consequential move that Pharaoh is making. And it's interesting that he does it so quickly and that he is so trusting. So we need to understand why Pharaoh himself is so convinced and so trusting of Joseph. And then also, the Torah describes that we have these 7 years of plenty, and then comes along the famine, and it says that everybody in Egypt was starving, and they screamed to Pharaoh for bread, and Pharaoh says to them, go to Egypt, so he says to all of Egypt, go to Joseph, and whatever he tells you to do, do. Now, on that sentence, Dr. Finkelstein sent me a quote from Rashi, where Rashi says that the people came to Pharaoh, and Pharaoh told them, listen, you're starving, go do whatever Yosef says. So Rashi gives us some background. Joseph told them that they need to circumcise themselves. You heard me right. They go asking for food, and Joseph is like, hey, you like my knife? Everybody needs to get circumcised. And then, when they came to Pharaoh, and they said, listen, he told us to circumcise ourselves, he says, well, guys, why didn't you actually store grain? Like, you knew this was happening. There was no secret here, right? Joseph interpreted the dreams. Why didn't you actually store grain? Didn't Joseph call out to you that the famine was coming? He said to them, listen, you better do whatever he says. They said, we did, yes, store grain. We did that. But it all became rotten. It all rotted. So he said to them, look, if so, you really better do whatever he says to do, including, in other words, the circumcision, because what if he decrees against us that we should die? So then we'll die. So yeah, circumcise and do whatever he says, and you'll get food, and that everything will be fine. So Dr. Finkelstein texted me today, and he asked me, is it true that Joseph actually told them, is it true that Joseph actually decreed that the produce should rot? Is that true? Did Joseph actually do that? Did he, so to speak, wave a magic wand or daven to Hashem? Hey, the food really should rot for the Egyptians? Is that what Joseph actually did? And if it's not true, then why does Pharaoh say that to them? So that's the question. We're going to talk about that. I told him it was an excellent question. Time for him to learn full-time in yeshiva. That was my point. Anyways, we're gonna talk about that, and it's really a great point. So what I'd like to do is begin with, what is the evidence in this sentence that something like this happened? And the answer is because the sentence says, I just want to read to you the sentence about when the people were starving. It says, the nation screamed to Pharaoh for bread. And Pharaoh said to Egypt, go to Joseph, whatever he tells you to do, do. Now, the reason that the rabbis are saying what they said is because everybody knew that Joseph was in charge of the grain. So why are they going to the Pharaoh? And why are they in such desperation that they're screaming? By the way, the word sa'aka in the Torah always means a scream that involves pain. Always. To be tzo'ek means to scream out in pain and suffering. Why are they in pain and suffering? Okay, we know that they're hungry, but why are they screaming out to Paro in pain? They should just simply say, hey, we need bread, but also why are they going to Paro and not to Yosef? And Paro says to them, go to Joseph, and he doesn't just say, and Joseph will give you bread, or maybe you should ask him nicely. He says, do whatever he tells you to do, which means that Yosef is making a big ask of them. And so that's how the rabbis know that a lot more is going on in the subtext. And therefore, the rabbis are saying that they did go to Joseph. And Joseph said, circumcise yourselves. They didn't want to do that. So they go to Paro and they're screaming out, this is terrible. What do you mean we have to circumcise ourselves? Now we understand why they're screaming out in pain. And then he says, not simply go back to him, or you know what, I'll tell Joseph to give you food. He says, whatever he tells you to do, do. Now, that is so important to understand, and especially in light of Dr. Finkelstein's question, and that's where we're going to begin our answer today. Yes, exactly, Rabbi Chil, we need to understand why Yosef is asking them to circumcise. But first, let's go back to Dr. Finkelstein's question and ask ourselves, did Joseph actually want and do something magical or spiritual to make the food rot? So as I told Dr. Finkelstein, I suggest no, he did not do that. But that is what Paro told the people. Now, why would I say Joseph would not do that? Why would Joseph do that? The people are hungry, the Torah says, and he has all the food in the world. You want to say he wants to make more money for Egypt? So he wanted their food to rot. He wanted them to first be much more, financially secure by getting them much more starving first. First of all, it's not very unlikely that it's going to last for 7 years. It's supposed to be 7 years of famine. Second of all, it's not Joseph's money anyways. It's not like he's getting wealthy on it. Either the people need food or they don't need food. And as we know, they ended up selling all of their assets very quickly, and the government still needed to continue to support them. It's not even clear what happens after the first 2 years. It's not clear what happened after the first 2 years, regardless, meaning maybe they needed another 5 years of supplies. So therefore, the rabbis are understanding that what Joseph is trying to do is help the Egyptian people become who they need to become. And as we know, this is not the first time that the children of Yaakov suggested to non-Jews to circumcise, right? This is exactly what happened in Shechem. Why did they suggest it then? And why would Joseph suggest it now? And here is my answer to you, and it's all about rehumanizing instead of dehumanizing. It is true that circumcision is a fundamental covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people, and not between Hashem and the rest of the nations of the world. That is true. Nonetheless, when we look at what is wrong with society today, and has often been a huge bane of existence of humanity, it is the indulgence and obsession with physical pleasure and lustfulness and money and an easy life, so to speak, versus a life that is filled with transformation, evolution, growing, obviously a spiritual connection to the divine. That has often been, in many different times in human history, the downfall of society. Whether you want to look at the downfall of Rome, or what happened with the Greeks, and more relevant is what's happening in Western society today. One thing that we can all agree on is that the world is getting more and more insane. Right? If what could happen on Bondi Beach happens, and if it wasn't only there, we just had Brown University. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Now we find that the attacker in Brown University himself looks like he committed suicide. The world is just trending crazy, where people have less and less meaning and purpose in their lives, and more ease, and less happiness and satisfaction in their lives, and more angst, discomfort. So I mentioned the book recently written by Jonathan Haidt called The Anxious Generation. Recently, I was listening to a different interview where there's this basic concept that the world has become dependent on the quote unquote machine, right? Which basically is technology and the ease of society to produce everything it needs and to become completely obsessed with everything that happens with technology. And as we know, people are not becoming happier and more fulfilled. Families are not becoming healthier and living more meaningful and better relationship, intimacy-filled lives. That is not what is happening in the general society. Why is that? Because when people become convinced that the only path to happiness is greed, selfishness, and getting all of my pleasures satisfied, they become disconnected from God, and they instead do everything that they can to amass power and wealth in order to have some sort of security.
I
One
somehow
second.
took a book myself,
Give me 1 second.
and it worked out. I got people to do it. It always works out.
I just trying to. Nope, not
I
working.
don't think I've ever.
Oh, hi. All right, you know what? Here we go. I got it. Okay. And when that is the approach in the world that people have, they become more and more insecure, more and more focused on what's the next pleasure to kind of numb themselves, to anesthetize themselves, their feelings of lack of purpose or meaningfulness, and they end up in an endless battle of gathering more money, seeking more pleasure, avoiding actual fulfillment and relationship building, and all the more so a relationship with the divine. And we end up in these horrible, horrible power structures that are really built on authoritarianism and the golden rule, the one with the gold rules, where it's only the people that have all the power that actually know how to live, and they're the ones that have to intimidate everyone into basically serving them or that power structure. That's what we end up with. And so what the Torah is telling us is that the dreams that Pharaoh has, and the reason that the Torah spends so much time on these dreams, is that there's a mythology in the world that the economy is good or the economy is bad, as if it happens on its own. Literally. It's as if the good cows can eat the bad cows, or the good grain can eat the bad grain. Who ever heard of such a concept? It's insane. Cows don't eat cows and grain doesn't eat grain. Who would ever think of that as a way of describing hunger or plenty? And the answer is, when you look at the world as though it's completely devoid of God, and you look at what the trend is, things are going well or things are going poorly, as if these things just have a life of their own, you're completely missing what is the truth of the universe. And the earliest story in the Torah that really explains this to us is the Tower of Babel. When all the people of the universe gather together, they want to build some kind of utopian society. And the way that they're going to do it is by building this huge tower that's going to reach up to the heaven, and it's either going to contend with God or kick God out of the world or prove that we don't need God. And it's all about how technology and urban living are going to help us. When the people, the anthropologists, and the people who are working on human health today are more and more and more convinced that all of this is actually destroying happiness in the world. Literally, the people that live in more rural societies and communities are a little bit more in touch with the idea that, weather matters and that there's a God, and you won't be able to control everything in your life. And they'll have a sense of satisfaction with something called work, labor, and a crop well earned and deserved, right? Versus some kind of thing that happens where we know that the stock is going to be worth more, we buy it and then we sell it before, we're too stupid to keep it, too long. That's not a meaningful living. That's not a way to live that gives a person any sense of the truth of how the universe truly operates. And so these dreams that Paro has is a way of expressing that society has a life of its own, that the economy of the society has a life of its own, and if you're lucky enough, you get more good years than bad years. And that's the way it is. And if you're just going to get bad years, you're just going to have to suffer through it. Now, the interpreters have no idea that it's one dream. They understand that it's two different dreams, and therefore they're really confused. But what Yosef is able to do is immediately explain, guys, you're missing the boat. This is not if, Paro is going to have a good life or Paro is going to have a bad life, or something with the money of Paro or the Egypt or the economy. That's not what it's about. What it's about is Hashem showing you something. That which Hashem is showing you is what this dream is all about. What he's going to do is what he's showing you. That's what this dream is all about. And the truth is, that's like an epiphany. That's like a mind-blowing concept to the authoritarian regime that is Egypt. But unfortunately, what the Egyptian people think about, and the only way that they can really envision something that makes sense to them, is you have a guy who's a dictator, who's in charge, gaming the system for his benefit. And therefore, the only thing that makes sense, if they have food that rotted, is that it must have been a human being that did it. And that's exactly what Paro feeds to them, so that they can accept the idea that Yosef really is in charge, right? The truth is that Yosef never asked for the food to be rotted. But what the Egyptians can understand is that really Yosef is manipulating the whole thing, and that he's the one with the power, and he's the one that, they have to bow to some extent. Joseph never asks for that. He never tries to convince them that he's going to do terrible things to them. But Paro wants them to believe it, because that's what an authoritarian regime does. They make everyone terrified that if you don't listen to what I say, you're going to die. And the truth is that intimidation really works. One of the very sad facts of Jewish populations, and I've tested this several times recently, is when I meet people from Russia, I ask them, do you have any siblings? And the answer is either no or one. Almost always. Because in a communist regime, they were forced to live in a certain way with, a certain housing situation and with a lack of sufficient funds. And so they were intimidated into having 1, 2, or 0 children. And that is a sad fact of the way that many times societies have evolved. So communism supposedly was, for the people. And instead, what does it turn out to be? A system where a few people are in charge, controlling everyone for their benefit. That's what it turns out. And Egypt was no different. And it's questionable if even the Egyptians at that time would have believed Paro had Paro said, no, he didn't make the food rot. Maybe ask Joseph why that happened. No, they just want to know that someone is in charge and what sacrifice they need to make in order to get back food or economic security. And that's the sad truth about, in general, the politics that we deal with in our society today. It's about who controls the money. We mentioned just last week about what happened in Minnesota, about the $1 billion plus that was stolen and the government was defrauded. This is happening left and right, where people have the opportunity to take advantage of large numbers of people, right? The people in power on top have the opportunity to take advantage of large numbers of people, and that's what they do. Joseph, on the other hand, all he cares about is, instead of taking advantage of the Egyptian people, is restoring the Egyptian people to their security. So what he recommends to Pharaoh at the end of the whole story is give them back their land, make a 20% tax, and you have a beautifully functioning society where people can earn and people can support a regime that hopefully protects the people. And that makes sense, a 20% flat tax. That's all Yosef actually cares to accomplish. So the idea of the Torah spending so much time on this topic is to remind us of Jewish responsibility to all of the world. So why does Joseph, hang on, my system is not responding so well today. So Ohad, if you can mute. Here, I got it. The Torah is telling us the incredible role that Jews have in this whole spectrum of the world, where you have authoritarian regimes and you have various opportunities for Jews to participate in different ways. The Torah is telling us that the Jewish responsibility is to make sure that as much as possible, we do have systems of government that really care for each other and that really takes care of its people. We spoke about that last week in terms of the butler and the baker. But now when we ask ourselves, why does Joseph say to circumcise? Because what he sees is an incredibly decadent, selfish, power-driven, greedy society. And he says, we need to insert some control over their lustfulness, some way to have them be aware that a human being is much more than a pleasure-seeking, power-driven, ambitious, greedy animal. And a fundamental way to do that is circumcision. Because as the Rambam tells us in the Guide to the Perplexed, it diminishes some of the pleasure of relations when the foreskin is removed, and at least there should be some attention, some practice and concept given that perhaps a human being can learn some self-discipline, and that there is more to being a human being than just having your immediate gratification for whatever pleasure you want or for whatever security you're seeking in terms of money, etc. And so that's why I would suggest that Joseph is recommending circumcision. And as my father points out, it does seem to have had the long-term effect that no Jewish women, even while they were enslaved in Egypt, were violated by the Egyptian people. That was the long-term effect, and we do know that the pedigree of the Jewish people is absolute. The Torah testifies that to us later, and so it seems to have had a real positive effect in that even though they were still a decadent and immoral people, there was some measure of control that the Jewish people were able to maintain their chastity in the face of Egyptian society. So what I would therefore like to propose is that the Jewish concept that Yosef is teaching us here is something that we all need to really think about today, how we need to interact with society. And as we mentioned at the outset of the class, and Ohad spoke about it, we have Ben Shapiro who responded to, basically what's happening on the extreme right and talking about the importance of truth and going against conspiracy theories and the way that they destabilize the society. And that's very true, as we know. And here's another conspiracy theory. Joseph decreed that the food should rot, and maybe he'll decree that we should all die. So you better do whatever he says. Nothing like that ever happened. Do people believe it? Sure. That's what we're dealing with today in terms of anti-Semitism and all the regurgitating of the old anti-Semitic tropes of the past in many, many forms and ways. But we can stay the course. We can speak the truth, just like Ben Shapiro was saying. And we can also, resurgence theories, and we can also do much more than that. We can actually show people how a society can function to be a much more dignified society. So on that note, at the same time that everything is happening with Joseph in Egypt, there's another whole layer to the story, what's happening with Joseph and the brothers. And this past Wednesday, we talked about becoming the adult in the room and how Joseph is trying to help the brothers to mature. And the therefore of that is that when we ourselves are going to work on how we become proactive instead of reactive, and when we ourselves are going to work on what does it mean to be hurt by a fellow Jew, but also to be able to forgive a fellow Jew, then we can help our fellow Jews become the adults in the room. That's what Joseph does for his brothers. He helps them to evolve and to mature into a much better version of themselves. That's what forgiveness is. Forgiveness is not, oh, I'm not going to go after you and kill you because you killed my husband, right? As Erica Kirk said. Basically, I need to let go. That's another way she explains it. I don't want to be controlled by the perpetrator. I need to forgive him so that it's off my mind. That's not what forgiveness is. And the Torah never asks for that. In fact, we find the opposite in the Torah in terms of a redeemer of blood. But this whole concept of what true forgiveness is, what Torah forgiveness is that the value of the other person is so important that the one who was hurt has a responsibility that if the other person asks for forgiveness, I should see them as a human being. I should see them as someone that I'm not looking to either take revenge from or to control with guilt, but I'm looking at them as who they can become and how they can be the best version of themselves. That's the Torah way. Help the other person become the adult in the room. Help them to mature, which is what Joseph does with the brothers. So what he does with the Egyptian society is help teach them that not everybody is looking to control them and dominate them and be an authoritarian over them. And we can run a just government because he's not looking to take advantage of them. Just like he's not looking to take advantage of the brothers who legitimately hurt him in such a heinous way that he really could demand restitution and demand that they should feel less than and he should put them down. No, that's not the Torah's way of forgiveness. But it's also not, oh yeah, it doesn't matter. Who cares? That's not valuing them as a person either. And to rehumanize people is to see them for everything that they can become, despite the evil that they did. And to rehumanize the Egyptian people is to try to help them understand the human beings that they could become, to rehumanize themselves instead of just being victims of their own greed and selfishness, which is certainly what was happening in the Egyptian government. We spoke about that in terms of the butler and the baker last week. And this week we're talking about in terms of Pharaoh, how he's still trying to control the people through intimidation. Joseph is saying, no, we can approach this thing in a whole different way. Human beings are really valuable. They have real dignity. Let them circumcise. Let them understand that they can have some self-discipline and self-control. And then we can have a much better functioning society and economy. So the brilliance of Joseph is his way to look at the dreams as an opportunity for the entire Egyptian people to learn that Hashem is showing them a message of how they can live a much more full and truly dignified life rather than the one in which they do live where they're controlled by their own passions and then ultimately have other people control them, like in a sort of a pyramid system, and really become enslaved. Or they can see themselves much more as capable earners and free people, like in the getting the land back and the 20% tax. And that's something that Paro immediately gravitates towards. And when the Torah says that Paro called Yosef from the pit and they took him out of the pit, that was to release him. He was then a free man. That's the way I'm suggesting it. They took him out of the pit. He was a free man. But they assumed, like they would have done, they show up as the dirty slave that's been mistreated for the last, whatever number of years. And that's the way he's going to show up to Pharaoh's house. And he says, no, I'm a dignified human being. I respect my king. I'm going to show up with clothing that is proper with a shave and a haircut that is proper, and I'm going to present as a human being should present. That was his choice, and that's how he came to Pharaoh on those terms. And so therefore, for Yosef to then become an obvious candidate as a leader makes a lot of sense, because he's able to see the true benefit of a human being that is free and a true ability to show people how to live a better way. And that's exactly what he does for Egypt. So now what I'd like to do is take some questions or comments, and then we're going to hear Noah's response to the Tucker Carlson response to Ben Shapiro, and Ari Marinelli did post that there's another good speech of Ben Shapiro's to watch. So everyone, please feel free. Dr. Horowitz, and then Aaron Yehuda, please take over.
Okay, I have two questions. The second one, one of them is I don't understand this. How did that Joseph's choice was to dress up for Paro, not that they dressed him up that way? I understand you read it that way, but who paid for him to do it? He just went on the street and begged and said, "I need new clothes to go in front of Paro." Who paid for it? And the second question is, by the time the Shibud Mitzrayim came about, was that a reversion to the old ways? Was that like a whole new perversion?
Great question, both of them. The first one, I don't know. I don't know who paid for it. I do know that Joseph was very charming, and either he did have somebody who was willing to, accede to his request for some money or help in getting dressed and changed, or
He's just put if I gave him his old clothes back.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know the answer. I imagine that it was very possible. He was quite the character, and had a lot of persuasion ability, I'm sure. As far as the second question, that's exactly the point. What was lost in the sentence when we read in the beginning of Exodus that a new king arose over Egypt that did not know Joseph, it wasn't just about the Jews. It was a new king arising over Egypt that was no longer to not be a complete dictator and an authoritarian over his people, which is why when it comes time to cast the Jewish children into the river, he says, and today cast the Egyptian ones into the river as well. That was one of their decrees, right? So it's not only describing that they don't have allegiance to Joseph and therefore to the Jews, it's saying he is going to have a whole different system of government, hence why it's described as a new king, especially if it was the same king. He is a new kind of a king. He's becoming an authoritarian again. Yes. Excellent point.
I see Rabbi Nakdiman.
Yes.
Yeah, a simple answer to Dr. Horowitz's question is he could simply make a demand. I can't appear in front of Paro without looking like a mensch.
Yeah, except that I would argue that that's how the butler maybe wanted him to appear.
That could be, but he could ask the people that butler didn't come to get him. Other people came to get him, and he said, "I don't think it's proper to appear in front of Paro any other way." Number two is the question I wanted to ask was really on top of Dr. Horowitz's question is. It's very, very depressing. You have here 80 years of Joseph's making them understand what life's all about, and they're all happy and this and that, I'm assuming. How does it, degenerate so quickly after he dies?
Unfortunately, I love your question, but my answer is even more depressing. When the Jews don't take on the Yosef identity, then the non-Jews are never going to know it. And that was the problem. And that's why it's Joseph and that entire generation died, because the Jewish people only retained, I'm talking about as a collective, not individuals, of course, they themselves were becoming secularized, and they were not having that same dignity that Joseph had.
You're actually mechaven to, I remember Yalkut Shimoni let me just look at Shmos. It's like Yimole or it's Osam. They filled up the theaters and the gymnasiums.
Okay. Yeah. And so in a very similar way, we have very few Jews that are standing up in, like Ben Shapiro, like some of the people on this call, like Dr. Finkelstein, that are actually on the front lines of espousing a very, very Jewish message in the face of the complete obliteration of the true dignity of human beings. Today, we have very few Jews that are doing that. And I'm sorry, I'm going to say this, wearing a black hat and, that's not the answer. That's not the answer. I'm not against that, but that's not the answer. That's not going to be, that's what a real person. Instead, that itself has become a cultural icon, right? Oh, you can't shoot a scene on the streets of New York or some other area without having a few people in black hats walk around, and Muslims in keffiyehs or turbans. That's not what Judaism is. Not a cultural message. It's a message about truth, and it's a message about dignity, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
I
Darius,
think
you're right. That is the point in the sentence, is the way that it changes the verb. Yes.
okay. Just briefly, as I recall, Yosef rose to positions of responsibility, gained respect in all environments. So it doesn't matter how he brought in as a slave or servant or anything else. He had the demeanor and made himself relevant and useful to all environments. I think he probably did gain some position of responsibility, if I recall correctly, even in the
Yes.
in the prison.
Yeah.
But you wanted to go ahead with Dr. Patterson and Noah,
Yeah. So just
I
before
think
Dr. Patterson, let me just say this, because we're going to have Dr. Patterson to know, but Ari just posted a comment that is so on point. Okay. And I'm sure Dr. Patterson is going to agree with me. So Ari's comment was, listen, not all people have Ben Shapiro's skill set. Let me remind everyone that one of the things Ben Shapiro said about Charlie Kirk is that he didn't have the skill set either when he started. Okay, but let's talk about the case in point. The case in point, you're going to listen to Noah's response. And when Noah first wrote an article about Gaza a year and a half ago, and she showed it to me, I said, Noah, you have to keep writing. Well, today she has a book of about 350 pages long. Dr. Patterson has read it, and I'll tell you it's quite excellent. And I promise you, Noah never really thought of herself as, I'm going to write a book on the anti-Semitic tropes and on Gaza, et cetera, et cetera. We're just not tapping in. The Jewish people are literally talented beyond belief. Everybody has to tap in. So Dr. Patterson, please go.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, I agree with what you just said. If you think you cannot do it, or if you think you can do it, you're right. So
Very good.
I love how you opened the task here that we see in Yosef is not to dehumanize, but rehumanize, to elevate. He's Yosef HaTzadik. He's Yosef HaIvri. And this is where we see that at work. The task of the Jewish people, and I love you kind of touched on this too, is to remind human beings of their humanity through example, testimony with our hands. And that begins with hunger. This is about hunger. We're not what we eat. We are what we offer someone else to eat. The table in our home where we invite others to eat takes the place of the altar. That's where we connect with Hashem through the offering of bread. This is where we talk Torah around the table, right? This is where we invite others to pray, Birkat Hamazon. And in our time, we're living in a time of a horrific confusion, as in other times, between being and having. We think the more we have, the more we are. This is dehumanizing confusion. This is idolatrous confusion. You mentioned the Tower of Babel, where the phrase "Nevalah Sham Sfatam," let us confuse their tongues, their language. Yaakov Cooley reads this as Nevalah as corpses. Let us make their language produce corpses. And he recalls the midrash of the Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, which says that the confusion shows itself that whenever someone fell to his death, nobody noticed. But when somebody dropped a brick, there was a great lamentation that went up. Where shall we ever find another one like it? It's a confusion between what makes us human, where our humanity lies. It begins with offering somebody a piece of bread, and that's what's so beautiful and profound. One of the things about this tale, and what Yosef teaches us, Yosef Hatzadik, and here we see why. One of the reasons, there are others, but one of the reasons why he's Yosef Hatzadik, and he always identifies as an Ivri. Yosef HaIvri. Nobody mistakes him for an Egyptian, as Zipporah did with Moses, right?
Right.
And an Egyptian came and helped us. You know that episode. No, Yosef is who he is, the Ivri, HaIvri.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Patterson. It's great to have you back.
Great to be back. Thank you.
Noah, you're good to go?
Sure, yeah. Thank you so much, Rabbi Zweig and Dr. Patterson and Dr. Finkelstein and Ohad and everyone who's encouraged me and other Jews to do what we can to, fight for the Jewish people and fight these lies. It is really demoralizing to continuously have people kind of lie about us. And I appreciated Ben Shapiro standing up there. I think we're so lucky to have somebody, yes, with his skill set and also just his ability to speak clearly and truthfully. I don't know anybody else who could do that on that stage. It was upsetting to see Tucker afterwards get up there, as Ohad mentioned, and kind of re-obfuscate and try to use the Jewish people's morality against them and basically say something to the effect of, okay, Ben may be fighting for quote unquote truth, but he doesn't even know the basic truth that we don't discriminate against other people based on who they are. And not only am I not an anti-Semite, I'm against anti-Semitism. My religion prohibits it. And basically insinuating that, Jews are the ones that discriminate against others because of who they are. And that explains the death toll in Gaza. And Ben is, basically tacitly okay with murder. All the Jews are. And so he basically turns everything back around by trying to use Jewish morality against the Jews. And so this is a little bit of an answer to Tucker to try to re-clarify. So Tucker, the issue isn't anti-Semitism, it's hypocrisy. Why do I impugn your motives? Because you impugned mine. You don't acknowledge casting the first stone, but you did. I'll show you. You accused me and people like me of enjoying the murder of children. You accused me and people like me of wanting to inflict collective punishment on an entire population and having no problem with the murder of kids. Murder. You used that word. You accused me and people like me of murder. Self-defense is not murder. You say you criticize a foreign government, but you don't. You criticize Jews. Your fundamental critique is not about how to fight a just war under international law. True to form, you have never offered solutions or engaged in specific debates about war fighting. Your fundamental critique is with Judaism. You say, Christianity introduced the world to the concept that the son is not responsible for his father's sins. Christianity doesn't believe in collective punishment. That's an Eastern philosophy. Read Jewish. Hello? Deuteronomy 24:16. Parents shall not be put to death for children, nor children be put to death for parents. They shall each be put to death only for their own crime. You think the reason there are dead children in Gaza is because Jews had no problem killing them. What evidence do you have to back up that proposition? Do you think that Jewish mothers wanted to send their children into booby-trapped tunnels in Gaza to fight terrorists who refused to evacuate civilians? Do you think a Jewish soldier is happy if he finds out that a round he fired killed a child in addition to a terrorist? Or are you willing to consider the possibility that, like you would, he will have PTSD for the rest of his life? You say that you are just not that into war. You're lucky that war has never come for you, Tucker. If it did, there are only two options. If someone came over the border to rape, maim, torture, and burn your family, you would either be the sniveling worm you claim to be and fail to protect your wife and daughters, or you would fight for them. And in case no one told you this, fighting is war. Either way, you have to live the rest of your life knowing you live next door to a psychopath who wants to rape, maim, torture, and burn your family at the first opportunity. Anytime you close your eyes, he's there, ready. So which would it be, Tucker? Would you try to fight for your family and take on the battle scars, both physical and moral, of a man? Or would you cower? How about a little empathy for those facing that choice, either way? The difference between you and the Jew is not actually ideology. His morality is your morality. He gave it to you. The difference between you and the Jew is circumstance. You are spoiled and lucky, and you look down on those who are forced to the fight.
Okay, everyone, should we have a round of applause? Awesome job, Noah. Anybody want to comment or respond to that?
I just want to know where it was written or sent in or whatever.
Noah wrote it, and like I mentioned, Noah's working on a.
It's not about period.
Ohad is going to post it. Our chat. Okay.
Forget about our chat. Where's she gonna get on some place that idiot Tucker will see it?
Yeah,
So,
I don't know what the options
We're
would
going to
be.
post the Reb Yechiel, and if you can get it somewhere, please let us know.
I
would be sending it into Ben Shapiro.
Mhm.
I do have his email, but I don't know.
Yeah, send it.
Send it in. Wait, can't
Send
hurt.
it.
What
Send it.
can you send
It's
it?
so perfectly worded.
Yeah, send it into Ben Shapiro. We can't lose it, or send it into the Post, the New York Post. I can't see why they wouldn't.
Why don't you send it to the Daily Wire? I'm sure they would print it.
Actually, exactly.
I don't know how to send it to the Daily Wire. I have just his email. But if anybody has an idea of who would potentially,
I know the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire, and I know numerous reporters there. So why don't you send? We'll talk afterwards, and I will make sure the editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire sees your piece.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Send it to Barry White. I think Barry White should see this.
Very wise.
Barry's too busy. Barry's too busy to see anything. That's what my experience.
You will see.
Everybody can be very collectively proud of Noah and our group. Have a great Shabbos, everyone.
thank
As
you,
someone-
Rabbi.
Beautifully said.
Dr. Patterson, what do you say?
Yep. Just as someone who has read her book and doing what I can do to promote it, I can say that it's brilliantly written, and we just got a good example of how eloquent, articulate, and deeply insightful and courageous Noah is. Thank you, Noah.
Thank you. That's awesome. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Good job.
Good Shabbos.
Happy
Shabbos.